Okay. Hey, hello, everybody. My name's Clay. We've got Mark Castleman here. We're very excited to have you join us on this Fortify webinar with an expert. Now, we had a little bit of technical difficulties getting started. We're a little bit late. We apologize for that. We had to create a new webinar here, and that seemed to work. So we're going to go live here now. And I want to introduce you to Mark, because this is we've been looking forward to this webinar for some time with you, Mark, because I've known you for years, nearly probably about 10 years that I first met you. And before I let Mark talk, I want to tell you how I met you. I want to tell the story of how I kind of came to know who Mark was. So many of you know who I helped start Fight the New Drug, a nonprofit organization that educates young people on the potential risks of pornography. And when we started that organization, we were just young college students, didn't know what we were doing, didn't know, exactly what we were getting ourselves into. And I remember when we started to research what the potential risks were, we stumbled upon a book called The Drug of the New Millennium, written by Mark Castleman. And we read that, devoured that book. We actually then found out later on that that he lived in the same state that we were in. So we invited him to a meeting where we all got together and we met. Do you remember that meeting that we had, Mark, with a bunch of college students?
I do remember that.
You influenced our campaign greatly. We referenced your material. Even our name had a slight kind of homage to your book, The Drug of the New Millennium, Fight the New Drug. That even played a role in that selection process. So we were very appreciative of all your work, and I have since come to know you as a friend and worked with you in the past, and we're just very honored to be able to have you as a part of the Fortify webinar series.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I want to tell a little bit more about who you are and your background. You are internationally known for speaking. You've written books. We mentioned one, The Drug of the New Millennium. You've recently written The Porn Paradox, or Pornography Paradox, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. You have been influential. You've helped literally thousands of people overcome addiction, not only in the pornography space, but also in the drug and alcohol space, as you have worked for different organizations and facilities. You've created organizations like Candeo. You've just been a force for good in this space for decades. And tell us a little bit about how you got into this world.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I didn't start out in the mental health field or the addiction field. I was actually in the financial field for quite a few years. And I myself had a sexual addiction, pornography addiction, that started when I was a kid. I grew up in Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley, the porn production capital of the world. It was then, and it still is now. And I grew up right in the midst of that, and got hooked really young, and suffered with that for about 30 years of my life. And so out of my own desperation and hopelessness, fighting this thing over and over and just continually falling back, I was introduced to a great man, Dr. Paige Bailey, who was a neuropsychologist. And he became my friend, my mentor, almost like a father to me. And out of the mentoring he gave me and all the work I did with him for a number of years came that first book, The Drug of the New Millennium. And
Phenomenal book.
It was a whole career shift for me. I thought, you know what, this is my calling. I got to do this. This is starting to set me free. And so I have to do this and help as many other people as I can. And so that's kind of how it all began. Yeah, 20 years ago. My gosh, long time ago.
Years ago, and you have you've written about, you've spoken about, you've created a curriculum around this idea of reaching long-lasting freedom, and you are an example of that being a potential, that it's possible, that you can reach it, because you've written, and I've heard you talk about the fact that you were pretty deep into this. This was a pretty big struggle for you at one time in your life, and if you can kind of get through that, others can as well.
Oh yeah, I reached a place where I thought I'll never be free of this. I'll take this to the grave. And
Yes.
I can tell guys, man, I was so deep and so hopeless. And if I can live like a normal guy today, finally, then it's possible for anyone. No
Right.
one outside that circle.
And that kind of led you to create Candeo, which is an online behavior change platform, overcoming pornography addiction. You created that platform. You created the curriculum with a team of professionals. We've worked with Candeo for a long time as well. You've also worked in the drug and alcohol space. You went back to school and got certified and credentialed within the pastoral and tell us about kind of the credentials that you later went and got so that you could continue to pursue this.
Yeah, my professional path is a little bit different than a lot of mental health professionals. I opted to go more down a spiritual pastoral path with regard to my credentialing. So I'm a clinical chaplain and pastoral counselor with a specialty in addiction. And the reason I chose that, I mean, I've been studying the brain science of this for more than 2 decades. And I've talked about how it affects the brain, how the brain works in addiction, you know, and specifically pornography addiction. And while that's important, I found over the years that understanding how this affects the brain matters, but it isn't enough by itself to break a person permanently free. There's another realm, and I like to refer to it as spirituality, right? Learning to call upon something or someone that's outside of your own brain, that's outside of you. I found if guys and gals don't have that spiritual path, all the neuroscience in the world, all the cognitive techniques and tools in the world will help, but it isn't enough in my experience to completely break them out. So I decided to combine my neuroscience training with also spiritual training and bring those two worlds together. And so that, which is a really interesting kind of combination that really kind of sets you apart in a lot of ways to have a unique perspective on how to address this. Yeah.
It kind of brings a really practical element with a really kind of faith-based spiritual element, and you pull those together, and it can really be an effective approach.
Yeah, it's when you bring those two things together, it's unstoppable. It really is.
And you currently run, you have an organization called Reclaim Your Life, or Your True Self. Sorry, Reclaim Your True Self.
Reclaim Your True Self. And that's my private practice where I work with guys on a daily basis personally to help them to break out of this.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you started talking about this idea that for you, one of your breakthrough moments was this idea of realizing and connecting with this concept of that you are not your brain, meaning that there is something beyond you that not only can be a catalytic, a very powerful and catalytic influence for change, but it can also kind of change your paradigm and your perspective on this struggle itself. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's a really important concept. You know, I myself, I tried the cognitive techniques and tools for a long time. I mean, better than a decade. And I found that if you could learn to think differently, if you could learn to understand what's going on in the brain with regard to this addiction, it's very helpful. In fact, I got longer periods of sobriety. You know, the gap in between relapses got wider and wider, and yet it was still there. I would still have times when the stresses in my life would get really heavy. Maybe there were different crisis events that would hit me, and my brain would go running back to that favorite drug of choice, that place to escape, you know, and avoid. That I learned over decades was the reliable, powerful, instant place to run to if things got too tough. And so while sobriety periods got bigger, I could never break completely out of it. And I thought, what is missing? I mean, I know the techniques, I know the tools. I would have a relapse, and after a relapse, I could explain to you exactly the chemicals that were flowing through my brain, what parts of my brain were lighting up. I could give you detailed play-by-play action about what happened to me. And yet, I still fell into it. So I thought, so these cognitive tools aren't enough by themselves. So what is the other aspect that's missing here? And what I came to was really this concept of spirituality, something outside of me a power that I can draw upon, an energy, an alliance, a connection that can bring strength to me that I don't have by myself. And for me, when I started to realize and harness and understand that, that made all the difference in the world. So now I have the cognitive tools, but I have a power and energy to bring to bear to use those tools. And when I have both of those things coming to the table, now I can really start to make some significant progress and have what I like to call your last relapse. There is such a thing as your last relapse. It is possible.
Yeah, and doesn't that sound nice to everybody listening? Like the last time, because oftentimes people say, "This is it. This is the last time. This is the last time," and they find out that it's a process, and that there is such a thing as the last time if you combine strategies.
Yeah,
I want to have you talk a little bit more about this idea of spirituality, because for a lot of people that's defined very differently. That can be very focused on a particular faith that they might hold, a belief system that associates or aligns with a particular religion and a congregation. For other people, it's a lot more broadly defined as far as, something with a higher power or an energy, as you talked about. We have people listening to this webinar that might come from a variety of different faiths or no faith or whatnot. Talk about what you mean by the definition of spirituality for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I was raised in I would call it a religiously rigid environment as a kid. And so, of course, all the solutions I was given through a lot of my early addiction years were, you just need to pray more. You need to read scripture more. You need to do all these things more, and you'll be fine. And that never worked for me. In fact, what it did is it brought to me a great deal of shame. I like to call it religious shame, because I tried all those things as hard as I could, and yet I kept falling back. And so the place I came to was, wow, I must be really uniquely weak and flawed. I'm just this huge loser because what they're telling me to do doesn't work for me, but it must be working for everybody else because they keep saying it. And so it just shamed me and actually put me into a place where I actually went deeper into my addiction for a time. So religion and spirituality are not necessarily the same thing at all.
It can be for some people, but they're not.
They can come together in a really beautiful way, but often they can also be very exclusive. They can oppose each other if we're coming at it from the wrong angle. So spirituality to me is coming to the place where we recognize that there's more to me than just this computer machine that's sitting between my ears, right? We all have this wonderful, magnificent brain, this 3.5-pound mass of incredible computer and reasoning and calculating and crunching capability that's sitting in our skull. But we're more than that. And what I often say is, regardless of your religious background or your belief or your faith, one of the very first laws of science says that something that exists now must have always existed. You can't make something out of nothing.
New matter, correct. Okay.
Yeah, and if something exists, it will always exist because you can't turn something into nothing. So if that's true, when yours and my brain is sitting under the ground 6 feet down with worms crawling in it, you and I will continue on in some form. And so if that's true, then that means that I am not my brain. I'm something more than that. And where this becomes critical in recovery, that means that I, the true higher self, the me that will exist when my brain is, decayed and gone, I can step back. I can stand back from that brain and I can watch it. I can observe it. I can look at it. And if that's true, then maybe I can start to direct and manage it if I have the right tools. So when I learned that, when I finally started to understand what that meant, it was huge for me. It opened up the whole door of my recovery. It's like, wow, I'm not just a slave to my thoughts and my urges, right? When they hit me in the moment, I go to war with them. I fight them until they wear me out. the battle just exhausts me, and then I give in and go look at pornography or act out sexually in order to get relief from the battle. But now, you mean I can actually step back from that and pause and not get sucked and pulled into it? I can actually look at it and observe it and choose what to do next. That was a huge deal for me. It was a power of choice that I never knew I had.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful kind of framework and paradigm to adopt, that you are more than your brain or your flesh and bone, that there's something beyond that will go on beyond that, and whatever that is can kind of then separate and control and be the master of that vessel.
Right, and the even bigger part of that is, if that's true, if I'm more than this brain, if I'm part of something bigger, then can I tap into that bigger thing? Can I tap into that universe, into that energy, into that infinite wisdom and strength and power in this moment to help me to manage this brain between my ears?
To guide you.
Yeah, and so it just brings, in this addiction, we feel so alone. We feel so isolated, right? It's all up to me. I have to work harder. I have to try harder. You just need more willpower. You just don't want it bad enough. And we try to adhere to those principles, and we just get exhausted. But now suddenly comes this principle that says, you know what? You're not alone in this. There is an energy and a wisdom and a power that you can draw upon in this moment to help you to stand back and manage this computer between your ears. And suddenly you're not alone. It's not all up to you. There's this bigness that you can tap into that's infinite.
It kind of puts a whole new meaning to the phrase, you can't do it alone. That you need support and help. And oftentimes that can rely or reference the people around us, the support we can gain here, but it can also reference what is beyond.
We like to say, there's no me in true recovery. There's only we. And it's one of the biggest things I push home with my guys. You're no longer alone. So stop saying me and stop saying I. It's we. It's us. And so this power that's outside of me includes those that also have the same challenge. We now become a brotherhood or a sisterhood. We now start to communicate with each other and rely upon each other and tap into each other. Fortify is a part of that thing that's outside of me that I can call upon. All of these resources, all of these wonderful people and things, that I'm no longer isolated and going it alone. I have this big, huge universe to call upon. And it's a whole different mindset. The reason we don't typically tap into that is because we're so ashamed. No one can know about this. I'm so ashamed of my behaviors. If anyone ever finds out, my reputation is shot, my life is over. And so we hunker down and we isolate and go inside of ourselves because we're just too afraid or scared to tap into that big set of resources and people that's right there waiting for us. It's just yeah.
And you've seen probably countless of individuals who have caught on to this, and how have you seen that impact their recovery process? I know it's impacted your recovery process, but how have you seen that impact others?
The difference is night and day, because I often work with, so in my private practice, typically the guys that I work with are the ones who are really at their wits' end. They've tried all kinds of things. They've tried 12-step, they've tried counseling, they've just tried endless things, religion, and they just can't get free. And so they usually end up being referred to me and coming into my program. And I find that what they're still using, even though they've worked with lots of alternatives, they're still practicing willpower as their primary strategy. Right? If I can just conjure enough control, if I can just control my thoughts enough, if I can really hunker down and battle this, then I'll succeed. And you listen to that languaging, right? I. If I can do this, if I can do that. And a big part of what I do is starting to get them to open themselves to the concept of, I can't do this alone. In fact, by myself, I am powerless to do this. I'll never overcome this by myself. And some people hear that at first say, well, Mark, that sounds kind of fatalistic. What do you mean? I'll never overcome this. You never will alone. Has it worked so far? How many times have you tried it? How many times have you made your declaration? I'm going to finally do this. This is the last time. And we fall back into it again and again. And so coming into this concept of moving from me to we makes all the difference in the world, because now it's not according to your willpower, your energy reserves, because willpower is fickle. We've all noticed it, right?
Yep.
How much sleep did you get last night? Right? What's going on? Did you have a stressful morning? Oh, guess what? Your willpower gas tank is empty by the time you hit this afternoon, and now you're totally powerless and you find yourself giving in, because willpower is a limited resource in the brain. But now you pull all these people and resources around you that you can call upon in the moment, and now you don't have to rely upon willpower. It's not about will, it's about skill. And if you can learn the skills and practice them and start to call upon all these resources outside of you, now recovery suddenly becomes, I'm not going to say easy, but I am going to say that there is a sense, there is an ease to it. It's not so hard. It isn't putting your head down and trudging forward. There is an ease to recovery when you're engaging in all of those things that are outside of yourself. It still takes time. It takes a lot of dedication and daily commitment, but there's an ease to it. It's not so blasted hard like we make it when we're alone. And
yes.
So when guys embrace that, man, they just take off in the recovery. I see it all the time.
I love how you talked about willpower, and there's a book called Change Anything. And it's and in that book they talk about the willpower myth, and this idea that, I love how you kind of referenced it as a fuel tank. Like, it's a limited resource. It eventually kind of exhausts, and you have to rebuild. And so if you rely upon that entirely, from A to Z, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, every single day, you're going to have moments on empty. You're going to.
Yeah.
When you're stressed, when you're traveling, when a lot hits you. When you're tired, when you're lonely, when you're vulnerable, in some way, things are going to come up and add up to the point where that exhausts all the way down to zero. So you can't rely on it. I love how you talk about that, because it is about skill. It is about community and support, and it is about awareness of the issue and kind of getting. So it's kind of combining all these forces to really put you in a different hemisphere of capacity to overcome. Right? That's what you're seeing.
Because if all you have in your recovery tool belt is willpower, you're in big trouble.
Well, and people try that. They always try that first, right? Willpower is the first approach. When people are trying to overcome something, way before they want to open up or try some program or anything of that nature, or get some help in any way, they're going to say, well, let me see if I can just do this on my own.
Yeah.
And for a great deal of individuals, that isn't enough.
Yeah,
particularly if they're dealing with actual compulsive patterns and addictive patterns, it's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, and a part of that is, we can tend to focus so much on the addiction. The addiction becomes the focal point of all of our thoughts and our energy. If I can just stop looking at pornography, if I can just stop engaging in the sexual behaviors, I'll be okay. I'll be fine. The challenge with that is addiction is just a symptom. What we really have to do is start to get to what are the core issues that are underlying that addiction. And you have to start peeling back the layers. I like to say that sobriety is not recovery. I can be sober through sheer willpower or using a couple of tools, and maybe I can stay away from my sexual outlets for months. I've even seen some guys stay away from it for years. But they haven't been practicing the use of skills. They haven't been calling upon all of those resources and powers outside of themselves. And inevitably what happens is a crisis hits. I lose my job. I have an illness. I have a relationship breakdown. Something happens that increases my stress level. And now I find myself suddenly having these powerful urges and running back to that drug of choice. And I'm confused. Wait a second. I've been sober for 8 months. How did that suddenly hit me out of the blue? Well, it's because you didn't get to the underlying core issues and start to heal those causes, heal the things that keep pushing you to have the need for that outlet. So addiction's a symptom, but we got to get to what's underneath of it. And that's where it really requires us to start to draw up on all these other resources and individuals and people to help us see what we can't see by ourselves. Frankly, what the ego isn't willing to look at. It's like,
right.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You want to shine the big, bright spotlight on all my underlying core issues? I don't think so. No, let's just run to pornography and just numb all of that out.
Right.
It's amazing what happens when we start to really look at what this is about.
So Jared asked a question that I want to bring up, and we'll get to some of the others that have been asked. But Jared asked, you keep on using the word ease as a possibility in recovery. For many people, and he mentions that that's not definitely not a word that applies for that individual. So any more tips in how we find more of that ease in our journey, in our healing journey? Like, how do you get that ease?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So what happens typically in our early recovery when we believe that we have to rely upon our own selves, our willpower, clenching our fists, trying harder, that's anything but ease. That just communicates hard, right? Trudging, putting your head down, right? You just think of the feeling of that. So the way to go to the place of ease is that you have to now draw to yourself as many resources as you possibly can that have nothing to do with your willpower. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have to actually make choices. And so here's how I draw that distinction. There is a difference between willpower and then what I call acts of the will. There are acts of the will, choices that I make in the moment when I use my will or my choice to select something that I can do in that moment. That's different than just gritting my teeth and going into willpower mode. So with my guys, for example, we kind of joke. I actually have a list of 27 tools that my clients can draw upon in the moment when they're feeling overwhelming sexual urges or desires. So there's a whole list of 27 tools. I tell them, I promise you that when you're feeling an urge, if you will use every one of those 27 tools in order, starting with number 1 and going to tool 27, you will never give in, guaranteed. And of course, we laugh, right? You'll actually be collapsed on your living room floor after, by tool 13. But the point is, that's where the sense of ease comes in. I don't have to rely upon my own willpower, where I am in the moment. I have these tools that I can simply plug into and simply use principles and practices that work in the moment. It's the principle and practice that's working, not me. And that brings now this sense of ease that I didn't have before. So I'll give the people listening a couple of really quick, simple tools that are an example of how you can go to this place of ease.
Let's get practical. Let's do this.
Let's get practical, because I love practical. So one of these concepts is, if I'm not my brain, then I, the true me, the higher self, has the ability in a moment of urge or unwanted thoughts to step back. I can literally stand outside my brain or myself and become an observer or a watcher of my thoughts without being entangled in them, right? It's a really simple tool that I use. And so the way I know these tools work is that I use them. People say, well, how did you come up with 27 tools? And how do you know what to tell your clients in your practice? And I said, it's 30 years of experimentation on my part and working with so many people. What works, what doesn't? And so this is a lot of trial and error. So one of the things I use, if I have an unwanted thought or urge that I sense is coming onto the stage of my mind, I immediately will pause. That's a big, important word. Pause. Just step back and go, whoa, isn't that interesting? Here comes this little urge onto the stage of my mind. Let me look at that for a minute. And then one of the tools I'll use, if that urge is really powerful, I'll put my hand like this and say, stop right there. There's no place for you here. This is the stage of my mind, right? Look at the fourth. This is the stage of my mind, and you don't get to be here. I literally say it that way. If I'm by myself, I will literally speak it the way I just did.
Yeah.
You don't get to be here.
Go away.
This is my stage, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of power in that. That's an act of the will, right? I'm making a choice. Me. Not you, brain. Not you, ego. Me. And then, so someone would say, okay, that's great. Stop right there. You don't get to be here. What happens if that's as far as I go? Well, here comes neuroscience. The brain abhors a vacuum. You can't just say, okay, you don't get to be here, thought or urge. Just stop. And now we're just going to have an empty stage. If you stay in that place for too long, your brain's going to rebel. And it's going to fill that void. And probably it's going to bring the same urge right back again. So there has to be a second part to this little tool. So if there's no place for that here on the stage of my mind, here comes the second very important question. What is there place for?
Mm-hmm.
If I don't want that urge or thought here, what do I want? What can I fill that void with? What do I purposely bring onto the stage of my mind? And I'll just kind of pause with that question. And inevitably, something will come to me. It might be, I'm going to go to a place of gratitude. What am I grateful for? Or, wow, you know what? I just had some thoughts of appreciation for my wife. Or I just started thinking of my daughter. Or, wow, you know, I should send that text message to my brother right now. Something will come to fill that void, that place. If that urge or thought doesn't get to be here, what does get to be here?
Right.
I'll sense what that is, and then once it comes, I'll go with it. And I'm off in life. I'm not going to stay there and battle with those thoughts. Hey, I got things to do, man. This is what gets to occupy my stage. Let's go. And away we go. I don't sit there. You don't fight. You just shift. And I love the word shift. You recognize, you pause, you shift, and you move. You move forward. You move on.
That kind of validates a quote that we often quote here in Fortify, and that is, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy on building the new, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And so it's kind of like, what are we working toward? What are we focusing on? It's not just about avoidance. It's not just about gritting your teeth and flexing and kind of hoping that it goes away. It's about kind of saying, look, I don't have time for you because of what I'm creating, what I'm building, the relationships, and you know, the passions and the purpose that I have in my life. Exactly. So I love that. And you talk about pausing, and Fortify, people in Fortify would recognize that as our tool that we call STAR, which is step back, take a few conscious breaths, ask yourself what you really want, and then respond, right? So it's kind of this pausing or slowing down process to say, okay, wait, get in control. It's that same concept of like stepping out and slowing down and saying, okay, what is going on here, and assessing that situation, right? So I love what you're talking about. For those of you who are interested in some of these tools, a lot of the same principles you can find within the curriculum, and they're working not only for people we're working with, but Mark is seeing the same thing in his practice, that those things are working for his clients as well. So these are validated kind of powerful tools that if implemented can have a profound impact.
And if you want to take that tool that I just described and you want to take it to just a little bit higher level about this concept of it's not just me, it's we in recovery. I have resources and power that I can call upon. So let's take that little tool and now advance it a little bit. And it's what I call the surrender process.
Yes, you talk about, in fact, you have the surrender practice, right?
Yeah,
you have an actual practice.
I think you guys have it in your deep dive, right?
Yeah, we have a deep dive of this, but I want you to explain it because I think it's a really powerful concept. This came from Mark specifically. Mark wrote this deeper dive that we have in Fortify.
Yeah. So in that moment when I recognize that unwanted thought or urge, and please realize this isn't just sexually related. It may not be that I have the urge to look at porn or or masturbate or act out sexually, perhaps it's a feeling of depression. Maybe I'm starting to feel overwhelmed by anxiety. Maybe it's resentment or anger or fear. Any of those core negative emotions that can drive me to act out in my addiction. As soon as I feel those, I again pause and step back and just observe what's going on, right? And the brain wants us to feel this sense of urgency. Oh, right, crisis, I'm feeling this feeling. You have to do something about it right now. And we have to sit back, no, let's just pause for a minute, because a feeling is just a feeling. It's not the end of the world. So let me just feel it. Let me sit in it for a moment. So I pause and I say, okay, I'm going to take that thought or urge or feeling off the table. Here's the surrender part. For me, because I have a belief in God, I surrender that current thought or urge up over to God. I'm saying, God, this is on the stage of my mind. It's really dominating, really is pushing me hard, but I'm going to give it over to you. Here you go. And I literally do that with my hands, my arms, this kind of giving it over, giving it up kind of feeling. So there you go. It's yours. It's off the table. So the question is, now what? If that's off the table, so what do I do? Now here comes the next part, where I ask my higher power. For me, it's God. For others, it could be the universe, energy, nature, whatever it is. But it's tapping into a wisdom that's not just in my head. It's out here in infinite wisdom. So that's off the table. So what do I need in this moment?
You ask for that.
Ask, what do I need most right now? Because I'm feeling these things because I have a need. It's legitimate. It's not just because I'm flawed or weak or perverted. Something's expressing in me, you have a need. So what can fill that right now? And then I just be quiet. I just stop and just be silent. And I am telling you, I have tested this with people who are religious, who are agnostic. I've tested this with atheists. They pause and wait in that moment, and inevitably something comes. An impression, a thought, right? An idea. It will come to you. And when it comes, now is the final step, which is so important. Act on it, and act on it right now.
So you've got surrender the thought, surrender the urge to the higher power. You've got ask, what can I fill that need with? What should I fill that need with? Guide me in this process. And then the third is respond to that request and that answer.
Otherwise, the ego brain is going to say, oh, I don't have time for that, or that won't work, or really, that can't be the answer.
The ego mind.
No, when it comes, do it. It might.
Okay.
You know what? You've had a hard day. Why don't you go to your freezer and get out that favorite chocolate fudge Dove bar and eat it? Just savor it. It might be that. It might be listen to some soothing music. It might be go do a random act of kindness for someone. I don't know what it is. It could be one of 1,000 things. Yeah. But infinite wisdom knows exactly what it is in that moment that you're needing. Call upon that. And then receive it and do it. So you look at that process compared to willpower and fighting and resisting, and just you sense the ease of that. It's a process.
That question, the ease. And Corky Mom 89 asked the question. She asked, what is the name of this practice? And I want to come back to, and so the name of the practice is surrender practice, the surrender practice.
Surrender practice. Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And she also asked the question about kind of what is the stop mantra. So I want to kind of draw some attention to this, because a couple of times now you have physically displayed and acted out these practices.
Yes.
Stop. You know, this is not just in a mental mind game where in your mind you're saying, stop, move on. I got to focus on something new. You are literally in the moment, out loud, even in public areas where you might say, stop. You don't have a place here on my stage, as you put it, right? and then you can go through this surrender practice where you surrender. Here it is, God or higher power or whatever I define that to be. Here is that thought. What should I respond? So it's very physical.
It is,
it's very,
and that's a really important point, because think about it. Addiction is physical.
Yeah.
How much of our body is engaged in our addiction rituals and practices? We're engaging the body. So it isn't just a brain that's sitting in your skull, but there's a body mind, or a mind body. It's the whole body that is involved in these practices. Addiction is learning. Make no mistake, addiction is hyper learning. And in that learning, all the aspects that we bring into addiction are part of that learning process. The room that we typically go into, the mouse that we put into our hand and starts scanning sites, this computer screen that is sitting in front of us in physical shape, the way our body is sitting, the color of the paint on the walls, the feel of the carpet under my toes. That's all part of the addiction pattern and ritual. So if you want to break out of that, you have to replace it also with a ritual and a pattern. The brain and the body love patterns. And so the more of the body you can engage in these tools, the more successful you're going to be, the more memorable it is, the more resources that you're bringing to bear. So for example, in that surrender process, I surrender it to God. Now when I pause and say, what do I need? I'll also take my hand and put it on my heart. What do I need? God or higher power universe, what do I need in this moment? And then I'll close my eyes and I'll feel with my heart and I'll just wait. And here comes the impression or the idea or the feeling of the thought. But look at my hand. I'm shifting from here to here. And I do it physically as well as mentally. Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of studies that talk about learning, as you talk about, and the reinforcing power of learning. And when you combine multiple sensory factors into that learning process, how it is far more ingrained, how it has far more of an impact, and not only on your ability to remember that, but also on its impact in the moment. So when you combine audio, a mental focus, and a physical touch, all those combining, it's really taking over in the moment. So it's really kind of taking over your whole focus right now. Every sense almost is kind of being consumed by this process, and by doing so, kind of aligning all those sensory factors, it really does kind of have a much more powerful influence on you.
It does. And I tell people, if at all possible, do this verbally out loud.
Yeah.
If you're in your car, if you're by yourself, even if you're in your house, your family knows. I mean, my family knows. Oh, dad's up there talking to himself again, right? Somebody will say, I saw you in your car talking to yourself with your hand on your heart. Because I do these tactics all the time. But think of self-talk in addiction. How often do we talk to ourselves in our mind or out loud in negative, fatalistic, right, inevitability ways? Self-talk is a big part of addiction. And so that same voicing it, saying it with power and authority and conviction is really important, as well as the physical part of the mannerisms with your body. Another thing I do when I put my hand on my heart and say, what do I need in this moment? When that thought or idea comes, I also express gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for sending me that impression. I'm so grateful for that. I'm now going to act on it. So now I've added in gratitude, which we know from neuroscience and psychology studies. Gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions that the body can experience. It's a reinforcer of behavior. This is love. And so look at all the things I'm bringing to bear in this one tool, and yet it's so simple, but it's very complex when it comes to what you're actually doing mentally, spiritually, physiologically, right? This is like all hands on deck. This is recovery combat. So you better bring all your tools to the table.
I like that. And I think it is a powerful tool. I think it for all the reasons you've discussed, it is significant, and it helps you it reiterates the importance of this concept of you are not your brain. you are much more than your brain. And your brain is a physical, 3.5 pound heap of tissue and muscle and whatnot. And that brain is a tool that we utilize and use and harness, and it can work to our advantage and our disadvantage depending on how we utilize it, and to be able to steer and take control of ourselves and control of our brain to say, look, I am more than this, and I'm going to kind of guide this process.
Yeah, it's a machine. I mean, the brain is nothing more than a machine, a magnificent one. Yeah. The point is, and I always refer to it as it can drive me, or I can drive it. You get to decide. That's the act of the will, right? To act or to let it act upon you. Which is it going to be? That's the choice. And once you start to understand how that works and how much power you have as your true self over it, it's amazing how recovery takes off. You're just like, wow, I'm not powerless like I thought I was. I'm not a slave to this. This isn't inevitable. I actually have a choice in the moment. Mm-hmm. And the more you do that, you'll feel your power of choice returning. Because we all know in deep addiction, your will is gone. Your ability to choose is literally gone. And I know what that feels like. I had many years where people said, why don't you just choose different? I can't. It's gone. It's done. And so practicing, I like to say you have these little choice points, right? Am I going to go to the left or am I going to go to the right? Which way? Well, my brain always goes to the left every time. And I have this deep channel and rut that just goes there automatically. But now when I start realizing I can step back and choose, if I can go to the right just once, now the next time will be just slightly easier. And the next a little easier still until I'm going to the right pretty often.
And that's just not kind of theory or kind of conceptual. Like literally, neurologically, that process is your brain is constantly rewiring, constantly changing according to what you do, focus on, consume on. And it's literal pathways. And so as you strengthen and reinforce a certain pathway, it strengthens and grows from a trail to a road to a highway over time. And that's exactly what's happened to lead one into addiction. We've got to reverse that in the new direction.
The same process that got you into this addiction can get you out.
Yeah. So Mark, we don't have a lot of time left. And I want to make sure I get to a couple questions in the last few minutes here. And one is, if you could pose one question to the entire audience, everybody that's listening and everyone that will listen in the archives, something that you think would be valuable for them to consider, what would that be? Something like, something that if you could talk to everybody at once right now and say, I want to pose one question to you, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think for me, the most important question would be, in what ways in your addiction are you still in isolation and disconnection from all the many resources and people that are out there to help you? Are you still trying to go this alone? Yeah, you're doing a Fortify program, but quite frankly, if it's just you and the computer, you're still isolated and cut off. So I invite all the listeners to say, how can I start to dare to have the courage to start to become more open, to start to reach out and connect, to be vulnerable, to be raw, to be real, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And it scares the brain to death to reach out and start to engage and be vulnerable. So how are you isolating? How are you not tapping into this marvelous set of power and resources? Are you still stuck in the I? I would invite everyone to look at that.
I couldn't agree more, Mark. I think that's a powerful question to pose, and it is tough. And there's a lot of people that say, I don't have anyone that I can speak to. And beyond maybe the Fortified community and beyond, if they have that belief to the higher power, they do. It is hard not to feel isolated when you don't have that physical communication with another individual that's in your corner. without that ally, without that accountability part, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
And of course, we are a resource, as Mark is discussing. For those that have that belief, there are resources beyond that are more powerful than anything that we're talking about. But I think both Mark and I would kind of both agree that getting somebody in your corner, in your real physical everyday life, someone that you can rely on, someone that you trust, a best friend, a religious leader, a parent, a partner, whomever that may be for you, getting them involved in your recovery process can unlock massive potential.
And keep in mind, it doesn't have to be connection where you're just basically talking all about your sexual addiction. You can become raw and vulnerable and connect with others just about your general emotions. Hey, I'm feeling really scared today. I just need to get honest and raw with somebody and say that. You don't have to run around and just be divulging every aspect of your addiction. Share with what you're feeling inside. Those are the underlying core issues that are feeding this whole thing anyway.
Yes. Excellent. Mark, we've run out of time, but I think you've given some incredible advice. You've taught us a lot of things. I know that everybody in attendance that are watching it live and in the archives are going to gain a lot from this webinar. So we just want to thank you for being a part of this, being a part of the Fortify community. You've been a huge influence and continue to be an influence for us moving forward. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, if guys if they want to look at stuff that I'm doing and get access to some mentoring and training videos that I'm going to send out, just go to my site, reclaimyourtrueself.com.
Reclaimyourtrueself.com. You've got a book, The Drug of the New Millennium. You've got another book coming, which is the Pornography Paradox. Yes, and so go check those out if you're interested. But again, Mark, thank you so much, and thanks everybody else for attending. And good luck, and keep moving forward. We love you.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.